everyone. Welcome to our audience here in Martinez Auditorium in the Granoff Center for the Creative Arts at Brown University, as well as to our virtual audience. We're glad that you're joining us for the Re-Examining Conservation exhibition and symposium presented by the Brown Arts Institute and Creature Conserve. This symposium features Brown faculty and students, as well as a stellar lineup of guest artists. Complete schedule details could be found in the digital program on the symposium website, which could be found at go.brown.edu/reexaminingconservation or via the QR code posted at the entrance of the auditorium. I'm Sheida Soleimani. I'm currently a fellow at the Brown Arts Initiative, a professor at Brandeis University, and a federally licensed wildlife rehabilitator. Please take some time, if you haven't already, to explore Creature Conserve's biennial art exhibition, Re-Examining Conservation. Questions at the intersection of the arts and sciences, installed here in our Cohen and Atrium galleries, as well as the beautifully curated reading room on level 2 of the building. The exhibition is free and open to the public through June 10th, and for those of you joining us from afar, an audio tour is available at the exhibition website. We're also delighted to be partnering with the Brown University Bookstore, who's carrying titles authored by many of our symposium participants and is offering a 20% discount on purchases of those titles made between now and Saturday, April 23rd. The discount will be automatically applied to purchases made in person at the bookstore. Thank you to everyone that's worked so hard to make these events possible, including Talia Field, the faculty director of the Brown Arts Institute, the staff of the BAI, the Creature Conserve team helmed by Dr. Lucy Spellman, the Animal Studies group at Brown, and the Tamaquag Museum's Indigenous Empowerment Network, who has also been working in conjunction with Creature Conserve on this exhibition in efforts to further amplify the voices of the Indigenous community in Rhode Island. I'm going to introduce our guests today, both from Foster Parrots, Kelly Duker and Amanda Coleman. Kelly is the current director of animal care at Foster Parrots, the New England Exotic Wildlife Sanctuary, and Amanda is the adoption program director with Foster Parrots. So I'm just going to let them take it from here, and I'm really excited to see their presentation. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome to having us today. We are both super excited to talk to you a little bit about what we do at Foster Parrots. So Foster Parrots is a nonprofit exotic animal sanctuary in Hope Valley, Rhode Island. We currently have 284 parrots, 23 reptiles, and 8 other avian species, which include peacocks and a crow. We are committed to all of our residents for the rest of their lifespans, with some species ranging over 80+ years. We have been in operation for 33 years, with our inception beginning in a pottery studio where our founder, Mark Johnson, once worked. These are the photos of Mark Johnson in his pottery studio in Cambridge, Mass. In the 1980s. He purchased his first parrot, a blue and gold macaw, before he was aware of the parrot problem, as a companion out of an ad in a newspaper. He soon had tens and hundreds of people asking him to take their birds. His studio quickly filled up and overflowed into his home in Rockland, Massachusetts. Mark soon recognized that there was a major need for rescue and sanctuary of unwanted parrots. So he founded Foster Parrots in his home and later moved to what is our current sanctuary on 15 acres in Hope Valley, Rhode Island.
All right, so our current property that we have now is 20,000 square feet opposed to the 1,500 square feet that we had before. So this allowed us to greatly develop and expand and rescue a lot more parrots in need. This property used to actually be the site of Chickadee Farms, which is a factory farm for chickens, which we've been able to poetically transform into a bird sanctuary. You'll see that leftmost structure, that really long pole barn, that's like the current building that we use where our residents reside. The overall property, too, we hope in the future to make an intentional nature preserve where the public can come with trails to visit and connect with the environment. This photo shows kind of the transitional, grueling process of taking this long pole barn and making them into a sanitary and functional space for our sanctuary residents. It was a staff and volunteer-driven process, so it really did take a lot of time and effort. Finally, we were at a place where we were able to create housing spaces for our birds. We incorporated mainly two different structures, aviaries, which are kind of these large caged-in spaces you see, and in the back, kind of behind the aviaries, you can see what we call play frames, which is an open concept style housing that is like a free hanging interwoven branch structure we create, and it really allows the birds to be in a cage-free mindset. All of the spaces that we developed for our birds is with the intent to minimize and eliminate small cage spaces and the cage mentality for the parrots that we have.
30 years later, we have grown into the largest parrot rescue organization in the Northeast with 10 employees and over 50 dedicated volunteers. Our mission at Foster Parrots is that Foster Parrots is dedicated to the rescue of parrots in captivity and in the wild. We offer lifelong sanctuary and permanent placement, adoption services for well-socialized birds that desire human companionship, humane education to help connect to animal and environmental issues, and conservation work to keep parrots safe in their natural habitats. Pictured here is Jane Goodall, a supporter of Foster Parrots during her visits to our sanctuary in both 2004 and 2017. With roughly 300 residents, you may be wondering where all of these parrots are coming from that live at our facility, and more importantly, what leads to so many unwanted parrots in the world. About a third of our sanctuary birds were wild caught and transported to the United States to be sold as pets. Importation of wild birds is pretty bleak. These birds are often stolen from their nests as chicks before they can defend themselves or even flee, then piled on top of each other for transport. Many birds die in this process. For example, it is estimated that 45 to 65% of wild-caught African greys die in transport. Today, there are policies in the United States to protect certain species, including the Wild Bird Conservation Act, which limits importation of exotic birds to the US, but it still occurs illegally. This is the team on the right from One Earth Conservation, one of our conservation partners. They go into the field to assess the current bird populations and poaching rates. On the right is a photo of wild-caught, illegally kept macaws confiscated by the government of Guatemala.
So the other 2/3 of our sanctuary are occupied by captive-bred parrots from the US. These birds are sourced from expos, breeders, bird shows, Craigslist, etc. With over 85% of parrots being rehomed in the first 2 years of captivity, clearly these birds are being surrendered and rehomed at extremely alarming rates. So you have to ask yourself, what is causing these birds to do so poorly in homes? Why are these birds being surrendered at such high rates? And in essence, what is the current captive parrot problem?
The real parrot problem is that people don't realize captivity is the problem. Parrot breeding itself comes with a host of problems. Parrot mills exist, just like puppy mills, to produce as many babies as possible for sale. Breeder birds are kept in tiny, dark boxes for their entire lives. Besides issues of poor conditions at breeding facilities, wild, undomesticated birds like parrots simply aren't suited for life in captivity. Parrots are largely misunderstood in captivity. What they are and who we are trying to mold them to be, a pet, which leads to all kinds of behavioral issues, and that lands them with us at Foster Parrots. Parrots bred in captivity are not distant relatives of parrots in the wild. They have not been domesticated over thousands of years like your dogs. They are still wild animals, no matter how you slice it. Many of the things we view as negative behaviors in a home setting are natural, innate behaviors for parrots in the wild.
These innate behaviors that are in parrots are simply incompatible with home life. In the wild, you would see parrots chewing on wood to sharpen their beaks. You see parrots chewing on trees to create nesting cavities for their offspring. In a home setting, this translates to, them chewing on your baseboards, your walls, your furniture, essentially tearing your house apart, as what happens in our facility on a daily basis. In the wild, parrots would, call out over vast distances to communicate to their flock mates, expressing different things. And in our homes, this translates to humans being extremely frustrated that their parrot screams and vocalizes all day. The thing is that parrots scream for attention. They really view humans as their flocks and their mates. And it's, when their needs aren't being met and it's just about impossible to meet a parrot's needs in captivity, their negative behaviors like screaming and aggression increase to no fault of their own. Truly, parrots are meant to be with other birds where these behaviors are natural and positive. We've also taken a creature that should be flying 40 miles a day and we've put them in a 2-foot cage. This has resulted in conditions like liver disease, heart disease, atherosclerosis, and so many other conditions being really common reasons for parrots to pass in captivity. These birds are sedentary in captivity. They're fed high-fat diets full of unusable calories. And birds, in essence, are flying machines. They have aerodynamic feathers. They have hollow bones to be essentially, extremely lightweight. They have hearts that are 2 times the size of human hearts relative to body ratio size. And when you take the very thing that clearly was an evolutionary goal for a species, you're going to get systemic breakdown. Not only are parrots behaviorally not compatible with home life, but they're also psychologically incompatible. Parrots are extremely intelligent, extremely social birds, and this makes captivity extremely difficult for them. We see an abundance of birds come through our doors with self-mutilating behaviors, things like feather chewing, feather plucking, and even skin mutilation. We also see a lot of stereotypic behaviors, which are repetitive, almost neurotic behaviors that serve no true purpose or function. You can think of an animal that paces around its enclosure at the zoo all day. These are self-soothing behaviors to help these birds cope with their anxieties and issues in a captive life. And this stereotypies and mutilation is simply something not seen in wild birds. This is truly a symptom of captivity and them not able to cope with the circumstances. Pictured on the left is George, one of our Goffin's cockatoos. He's a skin and feather mutilator. You can see that we have him fashioned in a foam collar. Sometimes we use vests, we use a lot of different creative things to help these birds, but in essence that will prevent him access, to his upper chest where he does mutilate. Thankfully, with a lot of stimulation toys, out of cage time, and CBD, we actually just recently this month were able to get George out of his collar where he's not self-mutilating himself still. But even despite what most people would view as really acceptable out of cage time and stimulation, George still struggles with this. He was simply built for a life bigger than what captivity can give him. Odie, a scarlet macaw on the right, a more recent intake this year, is another mutilating bird. She's a feather chewer and a feather plucker, but CBD has also really helped her, and you can actually see all of that kind of gray fuzzy feathers as all new growth since she's been with us.
Louis. Louis is a case study of a wild parrot in captivity. Louis is a resident we received earlier this year, a wild-caught Moluccan cockatoo at approximately 45 years old. He was caged for nearly 40 years of his life. This is not an uncommon story for us to hear. Early in Louis's life, he was purchased by college students who kept him in a frat house, and when he would vocalize loudly, they would hit his cage with brooms and bats and scream obscenities at him. Louis was later surrendered to an animal shelter where he was rehomed again to a family who was not equipped to take on a distressed parrot. Every time they approached Louis's cage, he would sway, he would hiss, and they became very fearful of Louis. This led to Louis being locked inside of his cage for the next 35 years. He was one of our most broken birds when he arrived at our sanctuary earlier this year. He feared everything and everyone. We respect Louie's boundaries and meet him where he's at. He will never ever have to be, even if he never trusts humans again, he has a comfortable space with foster parrots. Louie now resides on an open concept large play frame in our education center, where he can observe all of the day-to-day activities and interact with staff and volunteers on his own terms. Louie, again, will never be subjected to the confines of a cage.
So now that we've kind of roughly gone into and identified, a lot of the components of the current parrot problem, we can start to discuss what Foster Parrots as an organization is trying to do to help combat this. We're trying to do this through our 4 pillars, which are sanctuary, education, conservation, and our adoption program.
Our first pillar is our adoption services that we offer. On average, we receive 1 to 3 surrender requests every single day, and between 700 to 1,000 surrender requests each year, most requests emerging from multi-bird households, so the number of birds that need assistance far exceeds the formal number of requests that we receive. Parrots are the 4th most popular pet in the United States, just behind freshwater fish, with an average of 9 to 10 million homes in the US owning exotic birds. Parrots are most commonly surrendered for their displaying natural behaviors that humans find destructive, damaging, and loud. All of these natural behaviors occur in captivity in our homes due to our inability to meet a parrot's needs fully. They scream loudly and often excessively for attention. This typically leads them to being locked in a cage and covered, leading to a distressed, lonely bird. So if parrots are so unfit to live in captivity, then why do we offer adoption services? Some of the birds we take in are captive bred, human-raised, and extremely dependent and bonded to humans. And it would be a grave injustice to these birds to deny them the human impact that's taken place. When human-bonded birds like this are tried in some of our aviaries, they don't do well. They simply just don't know how to bird. It causes them more stress. So the best thing for them to do is to find well-qualified homes for these birds to go back into. Our adoption process is extremely strict. We have an in-depth application, interview, and home check all before people come in and meet our birds. Then we match our adopters with the bird for the best possible outcomes for both the family and for the birds. We typically send 50 to 100 new birds into new homes each year. If we're unable to take a bird in or find placement, we will often refer to our network of partner rescues throughout the United States. We are in constant need of qualified adopters that will allow our birds to live cage-free lifestyles while providing ample social support. It is an extremely difficult task to find Adopting a parrot is a life-changing event. Living with a parrot is often described as living with a 2-year-old child for the rest of your life. Out of the hundreds of applicants we receive, we approve, on average, less than half, with each adopter going through the combination of interviews, home visits, bonding visits, and educational content. Here in this slide are a few of our amazing adopters and the birds they have chosen to spend the rest of their lives with.
So what happens to the birds that come through our doors that aren't human-bonded birds and are deemed, unadoptable in different senses? These are birds that will become permanent residents of our sanctuary. Our main focuses for the birds at our sanctuary are enrichment, social support, autonomy, and health and nutrition. So all of the birds at our sanctuary get a balanced diet of pellets, nuts, and a fresh chopped salad every day. Each of our aviaries have their own individualized feeding protocols so that diets can be really specialized and species specific that volunteers and staff follow. A lot of our aviaries also get different supplements like liver support supplements and omega-3/6 fatty acids added to their diets if they've had things like heart disease or a history of strokes or seizures in their past. We even did have a recent bird come in, Peanut Butter, who was a Quaker, and she was deemed a hospice case when she came in because she had such severe liver disease that any amount of handling would send her in extreme respiratory distress. But actually, after 6 months of being on our liver support and our diet, she was just recently able to be integrated into a large community aviary of other Quakers with her mate. It was really exciting for us. Let me go back. All of our birds are also seen by a board-certified avian vet when they enter our facility for health checks, and they're quarantined for 30 days. But our board-certified avian vet also comes at a minimum once a month to our facility. However, visits are often needed frequently in between these, so we always schedule as needed. We're also in-house able to do many things like fluids, heat, oxygen support, injections, tube feedings, etc., in coordination with our vet, which really helps us manage such a large population on site. We have a lot of things implemented like bi-monthly beak and nail trims and physicals, and a lot of our birds we do monthly weigh-ins if they're more consideration or a bird of particular concern that we're monitoring. In addition to health and nutrition, social support and quality of life is one of the main factors we consider when making any decisions for our bird in our facilities, because simply birds are meant to be with other birds. They're really a flock mentality species. Almost all of our birds in our sanctuary live within a mate or a flock setting, which allows them to be independent from staff and volunteers, which of course we have limited time to give to these birds. So if we can make them bonded and independent with other birds, that's really ideal in our sanctuary setting. We of course do have some human bonded birds that still weren't suited for adoption. In those cases, we try our very best to give these birds as much human attention and support that we can, and we do have spaces, we call them bird lounges, that are kind of more home-like settings with couches and offices and areas of high human presence that these birds can get a lot more interaction with people.
Even with social support of their flock, the birds still need further enrichment to be kept busy. Normally, they would spend hours a day foraging for food, but in captivity, it takes them a fraction of that time to find food, even when we place the food in puzzle feeders. So we need to fill that time in order to help prevent boredom. We have species-appropriate enrichment for each of our residents. The need for destruction is huge with parrots. We have cardboard stackers, wood blocks, books, and foam toys that must be replaced daily and even weekly. Here in the slide, you can see that there's lovebirds, that they really enjoy the grasses and bamboo for enrichment. We aim to provide all of our residents with varied enrichment, that including social, cognitive, environmental, sensory, and food-based enrichments to keep the variation in their daily lives.
Autonomy is another very important priority for our birds, especially because these birds have already had so much taken from them in their lives. These parrots in captivity really have no personal choice on a day-to-day basis. They are literally stuck and confined often to cages for their entire lives. We let our birds at our sanctuary, choose who they would like to live with. Often we move them to aviary to see if they're going to connect with any certain birds. They have choice if they want to be outside or inside, because we have outdoor sections and indoor sections. How they want to spend their time in general. We give them as much freedom of choice as possible, and we always do our best to find the dynamic in our sanctuary that's going to work for them. Even at times, this takes us years to really find the best place for these birds to thrive with us. It's important to note that despite all we do to prioritize and all the things we implement in our sanctuary to give our birds a high quality of life, we still will never think that it can come close to providing the type of support that they would really truly need when you compare this to their natural lives and what they were really destined to have in the wild. Foster parrots is not a bird zoo. It's a travesty that we exist, and it's a negative consequence of the pet industry that we have to exist to help these birds.
Our third pillar is humane education. Our work at the sanctuary is important for the birds in our area, and there can never be enough parrot organizations with the overwhelming number of birds displaced in the United States. But caring for these birds in captivity is only one piece of that puzzle. There are several larger issues that we are trying to address. Humane education programs, like participating in this program today, along with giving educational tours at our facility and working with school groups, is part of that puzzle. We need to get the word out that parrots are not pets. They do not belong in cages, and the image of a caged parrot needs to not be normalized. Our fourth pillar is conservation. In addition to our work protecting parrots in captivity, Foster Parrots is a staunch conservationist. We believe in the deep interconnectedness of the human-animal-environment relationship. One of our partners, One Earth Conservation, hosts projects throughout Central and South America in primarily marginalized and often violent communities with high rates of poaching and illegal wildlife trade. Poaching in these areas is primarily driven by socioeconomic factors, with people participating just to feed their families. One Earth Conservation develops comprehensive conservation plans that integrate the needs of local business, animals, habitats, human inhabitants, and future generations of all species. They gain and distribute grants to in-country conservation teams. They participate as field biologists and conservation veterinarians, and they offer educational opportunities for both local and international communities. Another one of our conservation partners is Macaw Conservation in Costa Rica. Macaw Conservation is dedicated to the conservation and sustainable recuperation of wild scarlet and great green macaw populations throughout Central America. Through a combination of community engagement, environmental education, forest restoration, captive breeding, and soft release techniques, they promote the reintegration of these charismatic species into the ecosystems in which they belong. The baby scarlet macaw on the bottom right is Mila. Mila is a testament to macaw conservation's important work. Mila was found on the bottom of the forest floor by a night hiking tour group. Mila was brought to Macaw Conservation and estimated to be only 20 days old in 2019. Mila was recently released through a soft release process that took nearly a year and a half. Mila today has a flock and a mate of her own and has recently had her first successful clutch of chicks. Programs like One Earth Conservation and Macaw Conservation are vital to the protection of wild parrots.
So, what is our end goal as foster parrots? We're very hopeful through a comprehensive effort of sanctuary conservation and education that we can make a long-term difference in the way people think about parrots, and we can help them grow the wild population where parrots belong. Ultimately, we want to see these wild birds no longer bred and kept in captivity, and essentially for our sanctuary to no longer be needed in the future. So this is just a short,
welcome to Foster Parrots.
or will be, a short 5-minute video that just kind of gives an overview of our sanctuary, what we do, and just gives a visual of the inside of our facilities so people can see what it looks like.
Hey everybody, welcome to Foster Parrots. Our sanctuary facility that you see behind me is a permanent home for over 400 parrots and exotic animals. Let's take a look inside. At Foster Parrots, we're working to address the captive parrot problem through humane education, conservation efforts, adoption services, and sanctuary. Our 25,000 square foot sanctuary facility holds more than 40 aviaries and open concept spaces to accommodate our birds. Each parrot that arrives here is evaluated individually. We customize care to make sure we meet the needs of every bird as an individual. Every bird is different. Some birds are strongly human bonded and can be intimidated by the sanctuary setting. Birds who prefer human companionship go up for adoption into well-vetted, capable homes. Because we receive surrender requests for more than 700 unwanted parrots every year, we can't accommodate every bird in the sanctuary, and not all birds are good candidates for our aviaries. Social support is one of the biggest factors in how we make decisions for our birds. In the wild, parrots would remain with a flock and they would never be out of earshot from their mate. Sanctuary birds receive most of their social support from their aviary mates. If a bird is surrendered to us and we observe that they prefer avian companionship over people, we'll work to integrate them into an aviary with others of the same or similar species. Many of our birds come from emergency situations, including abuse, neglect, abandonment, or the death of their human caretaker. We prioritize birds in emergency situations and birds that require medical care that they would not be able to receive if foster parrots didn't step in. These birds have the highest impact on our resources and require the most financial support. So many parrots in captivity suffer from humans' poor understanding of what it takes to meet their needs. We receive surrender requests for aggressive birds, birds who scream excessively, and a host of other negative behaviors. These behaviors manifest because captive parrots aren't receiving the social support, diet, exercise, and enrichment that they need. We see these problems fade away as our birds integrate into a dynamic flock in an environment where they can fly, play, vocalize, and act like birds. Parrots are wild animals that have not been domesticated over thousands of years like cats and dogs have. We work to create a home for these birds who have no place else to turn that's as close as possible to the life they'd experience in the wild. Watching our birds form relationships with each other, enjoying a sunny day or a rainfall in their outdoor aviaries, or figuring out a foraging toy for the first time, is both rewarding and heartbreaking. Our sanctuary can't replace the life of freedom that they deserve. But with an unending stream of unwanted captive parrots knocking at our door, we do our best. We create enriched environments and we give our birds as much autonomy and freedom as we can. We can't do it without your help. Please support us and help us spread the word that no cage is big enough.
Well, that's kind of the end of the PowerPoint, and then we're going to go into
Hey everybody, welcome to
questions.
Foster Care.
All right.
So just first off, thank you guys so much. I mean, like, it's such amazing work that you do. So it's really exciting
Thank
to
you.
yeah,
Thank you so much.
just like hear more about it. And obviously I've known about you guys for a while, but yeah, nice to like finally see it all.
Absolutely.
So I have a few questions for you based off of y'all's presentation. So yeah, feel free to answer whatever resonates. But the first question I had, because you mentioned that you guys have 1/3, I believe, wild-caught birds.
Yes.
So how can you tell which birds in your care were wild-caught? And are there specific species that are typically poached or wild-caught? And can you speak more about the environmental implications as well as the implications for those specific species?
Yeah, so I guess I can briefly start that the only way we really know for sure if a bird has been wild caught is the difference in the leg band. There's kind of specific wild caught leg bands. They're more round, different than these flat kind of labeled leg bands that they have. So we typically will know because they have a wild caught band. We've also had some birds obviously be like directly taken or confiscated at the border being smuggled in. So we know that those birds are wild caught as well. The estimation might be lower because I think a lot of times those bands are cut off of these birds. Yeah. And 1/3 of all parrot species are currently threatened. So I think that's very telling to the current poaching rates. Our partner in One Earth Conservation with Laura Kim Joyner says the majority of the areas that she's monitoring for poaching is 100%. Yeah. So, they monitor, see, clutches of babies in trees. They come back the next week, and nearly at 100% rate, they are being taken. But specifically for species, I think you might talk more.
Yeah. So there's one of the case studies are yellow-naped Amazon parrots, really super popular in the pet trade. If you think about an Amazon, typically that's the Amazon that people think about, right? Right. They are now critically endangered. And it is primarily due to poaching and the illegal wildlife trade. Their numbers are dropping at exceeding rates. Currently, there's an estimated only 1,000 to 2,500 left in the wild. Excuse me. And to give you an idea of how quickly that population is decreasing, in 2009, they were listed with the International Union for Conservation of Nature as least concern. In 2012, they were listed as a vulnerable species. In 2017, they were listed as endangered. And in 2021, they were listed as critically endangered. And as far as the environmental implications, right, these are really long-range flyers. They're seed dispersers. So these are the birds they're going around, they're eating a lot of fruit, and they're dispersing those seeds across the rainforest and in the forest that they live. And without having seed dispersers, what happens, right? We don't have a forest. So when we're taking populations of animals down like this, we are also really impacting the environments in which they live too.
I'll make a quick point too that we've really seen that captive breeding, it really drives the market and demand for wild-caught birds. So we really strongly believe as long as there are parrots in captivity, wild populations will just simply not be safe.
Mm-hmm. Wow, yeah. It's all just awful and such a shame, but thanks for answering that question. I had no idea about either of those things. But that leads me into my second question when you talk about captive breeding. Are there laws that are in place for breeders? And is it an industry that is at all regulated? Like, is there a quality of life regulation or like animal abuse?
So there's not a lot of regulations out there for parrots. One of the regulations, well, I don't even know if it's regulation, is the Wild Bird Conservation Act. Right. But it's not foolproof.
No, not at all.
The Wild Bird Conservation Act requires that all trade in wild birds involving the U.S. is biologically sustainable and to the benefit of species, and limits imports of exotic birds when not beneficial to the species. So they're not. It's not foolproof, right. And it still does encourage some breeding too.
So you talk about parrots not being a species that are meant to be pets, and how people have become frustrated when their pet parrots exhibit natural behaviors like screaming, biting, and chewing. What type of disciplinary action do owners usually take to teach their birds, and how does this affect them in the long run? I think you mentioned a little bit about the broom hitting.
Yeah, people get really frustrated. You have this bird who's screaming at the top of their lungs, as they're meant to do in the wild, and in your house, it can be a lot, right? And a lot of people just are not equipped to handle that. They're screaming for attention. They're screaming because they want food. They're screaming for all the reasons. They're locked in a cage. And then most of the time, what happens, we take the birds, we lock them away in a cage, they'll cover them up so that they, tries to keep them quiet. And really what that does is it just leads to more distressed birds. So it's really hard. We get in, we have so many birds that come in through our doors that have been in these situations. Recently, in this last intake round, I have a 2-year-old green-cheeked conure come in. His name is Pablo. He was purchased at Petco 2 years ago as a baby, and they took him out a few times and realized very quickly that he's a bird and will poop all over the house. So Yep, we locked him in a cage for the last 2 years before reaching out to us, and it was a very small cage with minimal toys and enrichment. And at only 2 years old, he's still a baby, and he's already started to pluck all of his feathers out of his chest.
2 years old, so it just
2 years
happens
old.
really fast.
Yeah, actually, by the time the birds reach foster parrots, they've typically gone through 1 to 3 homes.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's heartbreaking. And do you feel like this is not on my question script, but do you feel like they, if they are coming from a home where someone didn't plan for end of life,
Yep.
are they going to be missing that person? Do they have a hard time,
Yes.
bonding with new people?
Absolutely, yeah. Birds are highly intelligent, highly social beings, and they come in extremely confused and sad, and you can see the grief. Gizmo, she was actually in one of our slides on the Faces of Surrender. Her owner had passed away, and she arrived at our doorstep, and she was just stressed. She was sad. She sat in her cage. She was you could tell she would just sit there very quietly, sway back and forth. She'd stay away from us. And many times owners also don't recognize that there's health issues going on with the birds too. Come to find out, Gizmo was roughly 95% blind, and her previous caretakers weren't aware of that.
Oh my God.
So not only are you seeing birds that are coming in and have to adjust to this new environment and new people and new surroundings, but you're also seeing birds that are coming in with an array of health issues that their owners weren't aware of.
It's heartbreaking. Nothing surprises me, honestly. When you work with animals and people long enough, you
see a
find
lot,
these things
yeah.
that you see a lot.
But there's a lot of hope, I think, too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think education and
Yes.
conservation are like two of the answers, and I think in your pillars you mentioned that.
Absolutely.
So that's really great. So I have my last question, and then we'll open it up to the audience. This one's a little long. A lot of animals in captivity have a history of being prescribed antidepressants. In a recent essay for the New York Times, Emma Maris wrote that many zoos use Prozac and other psychoactive drugs on at least some of their animals to deal with the mental effects of captivity. The Los Angeles Zoo has used Celexa, an antidepressant, to control aggression in one of its chimps, Gus. A polar bear at the Central Park Zoo was given Prozac as part of an attempt to stop him from swimming endless figure-8 laps in his tiny pool. The Toledo Zoo has dosed zebras and wildebeest with the antipsychotic haloperidol to keep them calm, and has put an orangutan on Prozac. When a female gorilla named Johari kept fighting off the male she was placed with, the zoo dosed her with Prozac until she allowed him to mate with her. A 2000 survey of US and Canadian zoos found that nearly half of respondents were giving their gorillas Haldol, Valium, or other psychopharmaceutical drugs. So many of the birds at foster parrots come from abusive backgrounds that don't take their needs into consideration. What are some of the symptoms, do you think, that make a bird an appropriate candidate for medical and for intervention for behavioral drugs? Because you mentioned, like CBD or Prozac even. And how has this helped some of your birds kind of get over some other situations?
Yeah, so we definitely don't necessarily have set parameters. Like if a bird does X, Y, and Z, they will go on this medication. They're, just like people, they're really looked at as a case-by-case basis for individualized treatment. I'll say almost always we're able to treat a lot of these psych issues with birds with, supportive care, with allowing them to express those natural behaviors with us. A lot of out-of-cage time, toy enrichment, things like that. Typically with us, we see these birds calm down. If that doesn't work, a lot of times, with 300 roughly birds we have about only 6 birds that are on CBD. We've had varying levels of success with those. We have had a lot of success with our pluckers, like Odie. She actually was on it, and then we took her off because we kind of saw that stop, and now that she's been off, she hasn't really reactivated that. George mentioned he's also on CBD. And it's a pretty benign, I just think it's a general supportive thing.
Totally.
If those don't work, we don't have any birds currently medicated with a heavier medication like Prozac. But we did in our past, when I spoke to previous staff about ways that we had medicated, there was 2 birds, one being Rainbow and Amazon, that was placed on Prozac. And I think that took place because, nothing else had worked for her.
Right.
And that bird was having neurotic, obsessive fits of feather plucking. Normally feather plucking to us, it's, compared to skin mutilation, we find if you put vests and collars on those birds, it's going to have more of a negative impact than anything. We're not too worried about, being excessive with feather pluckers, but this bird in particular, it was like neurotic, obsessive, anxious fits where she really looked like she was suffering. So they did put that bird on Prozac, which was successful for her in that case, but it was a temporary thing. She was able to come off of it, and it really helped her kind of get out of these fits. And I think the other bird was like a really severe skin mutilator that they were struggling with. But I will say we have a lot of skin mutilators, and none of our current cases, we're able to support them through the anti-mutilation devices, through supportive care, and we're able to see them do really well over time. And like George, stop their mutilation. So
It's amazing to know that could happen, and that could be like a future for them.
yeah.
So those are all my questions. I'm going to open it up to the audience, and it looks like we have 5 minutes.
Oh, nice. Perfect timing.
So if anyone has any questions, I guess just raise your hand and a microphone will come to you. And we're also taking questions from the audience on Zoom.
Maybe not. Okay.
Give it a few more seconds. Do we have any coming in from the Zoom? No? All right. Well, in case we have any others come in, well, thank you for being here, and thank you guys. We really, really appreciate all the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
having us.
Yeah.
It was an honor to be asked,
Yeah.
honestly. So thank you so much.